Have you ever seen the look on someone's face when power suddenly slips through their fingers? When the person who thought they held all the control realizes they just tangled with someone they should never have crossed? That's exactly what happened in our quiet suburban neighborhood, and it all started with a letter. My wife Laura stood by the kitchen counter one morning, holding an envelope with the HOA's bold logo stamped across the top. Her brows were furrowed, lips pressed tight. I could tell this wasn't just another warning about grass height or trash bins. She looked at me, her voice sharp but trembling. They fined us. $3,500. For what? For planting roses by the mailbox? I laughed at first, thinking she must be exaggerating. $3,500? That was more than some people paid in rent, but when I read the letter myself, my chest tightened. The HOA claimed her small garden, which she had lovingly maintained for years, violated some vague aesthetic uniformity rule. And the one leading the charge? A woman everyone in the neighborhood secretly called Karen. Karen wasn't just another board member, she was the self-appointed sheriff of our streets. Tall, sharp features, always strutting with a clipboard in hand like she was running a military base instead of a neighborhood. She had a history of targeting families she didn't like. And from the moment Laura and I moved in, she decided we were her next project. Laura tossed the letter on the table. I'm not paying this, I refuse. There was steel in her voice, but I knew how much these battles drained her. Every rose in that garden carried meaning for her. One for her late mother, one for the daughter we lost too soon. Pulling them out would feel like tearing pages from her heart. I told her we'd fight it. Let them come. They don't know who they're dealing with. Days passed and Karen escalated. She sent emails filled with legal jargon, posted passive-aggressive notes on our door, even stood on the sidewalk glaring at Laura while she watered her plants. Then came the moment that would change everything. Karen called the cops. It was a Saturday afternoon. Laura was trimming the roses, humming softly to herself, when two squad cars pulled into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some stepping out to watch. Karen strutted forward, pointing dramatically like she'd just caught a criminal in the act. Officer. That woman is in violation of HOA rules and has refused to comply. She's obstructing community standards and trespassing on common property. The absurdity of it all made me laugh under my breath. How could someone trespass on their own front yard? But Karen wasn't laughing. She expected Laura to be humiliated, maybe even handcuffed. One officer, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped closer to Laura. His expression was calm but serious, the way cops look when they're assessing a situation. Laura stood her ground, garden shears still in hand, her voice steady. This is my yard. It's my roses. I'm not paying a dime for their harassment. The officer glanced down at the fine notice Karen had shoved into his hand. His eyes scanned the name at the top, and then something unexpected happened. His brows shot up, looked back at Laura, his face shifting from stern professionalism to something closer to disbelief. His voice came out slower now, almost careful. Ma'am, Judge Laura Williams, you live here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Karen's smug smirk faltered for the first time. A couple of neighbors whispered, realizing the woman Karen had been targeting wasn't just any homeowner. Laura wasn't just my wife, she was a respected judge in our county, a woman who had spent her life upholding justice, defending the powerless, and calling out corruption when she saw it. Laura crossed her arms, staring Karen down. Yes, officer, I live here. And this, she gestured toward the roses, is nothing more than a personal vendetta. The officer turned to Karen, and his tone hardened. Is this what you dragged us out here for? A rose garden? You didn't think to mention the homeowner as a sitting judge? Karen stammered, color draining from her face. For the first time, her grip on authority slipped. She looked around for backup, but the neighbors weren't nodding in support anymore. They were shaking their heads, murmuring, some even chuckling at her humiliation. And that was only the beginning. The street was so quiet you could hear the breeze rattling the leaves. Neighbors who had once bowed to Karen's authority now leaned in, eager to see how the tables might turn. The officer, still standing between Karen and my wife, folded the paper with deliberate calm and handed it back to her. His eyes never left Karen's face. Ma'am, he said firmly, this is not a criminal matter. This is not even a police matter. What you've done here calling us out for personal HOA disputes wastes public resources. Karen's lips twitched, searching for words. But she's refused to pay. She's defying the HOA. That's grounds for fines. For your action. The officer cut her off, his voice sharp now. Not ours. Unless you've got a real emergency, don't call 911 to enforce your personal vendettas. The murmurs grew louder. A few neighbors clapped softly. Others exchanged relieved glances. They'd all been under Karen's thumb at some point. And seeing her called out in public was a moment they'd dreamed of, but never dared hope for. Laura stood tall, her composure unshaken. But inside I knew her heart was pounding. She wasn't the type to bask in public attention, but she also wasn't one to back down from a fight. She turned toward Karen, her voice steady and calm. I've spent my life serving justice, making sure people are treated fairly. And you've spent your time tormenting families for the height of their grass and the color of their shutters. Enough is enough. Karen's eyes darted wildly. Her face, once smug, was now tight with panic. But still, she wasn't ready to give up her crown. You can't just ignore the HOA, she snapped, her voice shrill. Rules are rules. You think because you're a judge you're above the law? Laura's lips curved into the faintest smile. No. I think because I'm a judge, I understand the law better than you. The officer let out a low whistle, shaking his head as if to say he'd seen enough. He motioned to his partner, and the two of them started back toward their squad cars. Before leaving, though, he paused, leaning closer to Karen. His words carried just enough volume for everyone to hear. If I were you, I'd tread carefully. You're picking fights with the wrong people. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the whispers didn't stop. Neighbors shared knowing looks, as though a fog of fear had finally lifted. Children ran back to their bikes. Adults returned to porches, but all with one thought in mind. The mighty Karen had been knocked down a peg. That night, Laura and I sat on the porch, the roses glowing softly in the moonlight. I could see the weariness in her eyes, but also the fire. She turned to me, her voice quieter now. This isn't over. She'd come back harder. People like her always do. I nodded. Karen had power because people let her. She bullied, intimidated, and threatened until resistance seemed pointless. But that night, for the first time, the neighborhood had seen her cornered, and I suspected Karen wouldn't take that humiliation lightly. Sure enough, the very next week, another letter arrived. This time it was in T. Just to find it was a formal notice threatening a lien on our home if we didn't comply. Karen was escalating. She wanted blood. Laura read it aloud, her voice calm but icy. She wants to drag this into court. She wants a fight. She folded the letter, set it neatly on the table, and met my eyes. Then a fight is exactly what she'll get. I should have been nervous. After all, fighting an HOA is no small battle. They're known for deep pockets, endless legal tricks, and wearing down homeowners until they surrender. But with Laura's determination and her legal expertise, I felt a surge of confidence. The twist came sooner than expected. At the next HOA meeting, Karen strutted in with her usual arrogance, expecting to dominate the room. She wore her pearls, carried her leather binder, and started the session with her trademark smirk. But this time, something was different. When Laura and I walked into that meeting, the entire room shifted. Turned to us, but not with fear this time, with hope. People who had silently endured Karen's bullying suddenly looked ready for change. And as Laura stood to speak, Karen's smirk faltered. My name is Judge Laura Williams, she began, her voice strong but calm. And tonight we're going to talk about justice, not intimidation. The room fell into a hush. Even Karen's pen froze above her clipboard. The battle lines had been drawn. And what happened in that meeting would shake the foundation of our neighborhood and Karen's reign for good. The community center had never felt so alive. Folding chairs squeaked against the floor as neighbors shifted, murmuring among themselves, waiting for what came next. Karen sat at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her binder stuffed with papers like a weapon she couldn't wait to use. Her lips curled into a practiced smile, but her eyes betrayed unease. Laura stood at the front of the room, her posture calm but commanding. She wasn't there as my wife, or even as a homeowner. She was there as the woman who had spent years presiding over cases where fairness often came under fire. Tonight the gavel wasn't in her hand, but her presence carried the same weight. Neighbors, Laura began, her voice clear and steady. I know many of you have received letters like the one we did. Fines for trivial matters, threats of liens, threats that if you don't comply, you'll lose your home. A wave of nods rippled through the crowd. I could see their faces' relief mixed with fear. Some had tears in their eyes, others clenched their jaws. They had lived under Karen's thumb for too long, and Laura had just given them the courage to admit it out loud. Karen slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the hall. This is out of order. Homeowners' meetings are not a soapbox for complaints. The rules are in place for a reason, and if people can't follow them, then they don't belong in this neighborhood. Laura didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to the table, her gaze locked on Karen's. Rules are meant to serve a community, not strangle it. When fines are used as weapons, when families are threatened with losing their homes over roses, shutters, or children's toys in the yard that's not governance, that's abuse. The crowd erupted in murmurs, louder this time. A man in the back raised his hand. She'll fine me $500 for having my trash bin out for an extra hour. Another woman spoke up, her voice trembling. I got a warning for my kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Karen's face reddened. Enough, these are violations. If you don't like it, you can take it up with the board. Karen, Laura cut her off, her tone sharp now. You are the board. Or at least, you've acted like you are. You've turned this HOA into your personal kingdom, and you've done it unchecked because people were too afraid to fight back. Karen's eyes flickered, and for a split second, I saw something I'd never seen before. Doubt. But just as quickly, she masked it with fury. She straightened in her chair, pointing a finger at Laura. You think you can walk in here, throw your title around, and scare us into submission? You're not above the HOA? You may be a judge in the courtroom, but in this neighborhood, I make the rules. The room went silent. Everyone waited for Laura's response. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout or argue. Instead, she pulled out a folder from her bag and laid it gently on the table in front of Karen. These, she said evenly, are legal precedents. Cases where HOAs crossed the line, where they abused their power and were taken to court and lost. Every single fine you've issued beyond reasonable cause could be challenged. Every threat of a lien could be deemed unlawful. And if you continue, I want to just fight for myself. Fight for every single family in this neighborhood. Karen's smirk faltered. Her hand twitched against the table. She hadn't expected pushback like this. She thrived on intimidation, but here was someone she couldn't scare. Someone who had the knowledge and the will to dismantle her entire game. Then came the twist one no one in that room was ready for. From the back of the hall, the very officer who had responded to Karen's call a week earlier stepped inside.
Nice.
He wasn't in uniform this time, just a plain shirt and jeans. But his presence commanded attention. He raised a hand. Sorry to interrupt, but I live here too. Gasps echoed. Heads turned. Even Karen's jaw dropped. He stepped forward, addressing the room. I've watched what's been happening here for years. The fines, the threats, the harassment. And I've stayed quiet because, like many of you, I didn't want to be a target. But after what I saw last weekend, I couldn't stay silent any longer. His eyes locked on Karen. You've gone too far. Karen sputtered. You can't just barge in here. But the officer ignored her, turning to Laura instead. Judge Williams, if you're willing to take this on, you won't be alone. I'll stand with you. And so will others. The room erupted in applause. Neighbors rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. For the first time, Karen looked small, powerless, cornered. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just our fight anymore. It was everyone's. The applause faded into a hum of voices, but the energy in the room was different now. It wasn't fear anymore. It was unity. People who had once cowered under Karen's rule suddenly sat taller, emboldened by the officer's words and Laura's unwavering stance. Karen, however, wasn't finished. Her face was crimson, her hands trembling as she clutched her binder like a shield. This is a mob, she snapped. An out-of-control mob being manipulated by a woman who thinks her robe makes her queen. You people are forgetting who runs this HOA, me, and if you think you can overthrow me, you'll regret it. Laura stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. No, Karen, you've forgotten what an HOA is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a community, not a dictatorship. And right now, this community is telling you, we've had enough. Karen's laugh was bitter, hollow. Enough. You think a show of hands changes anything? I hold the records, the bylaws, the accounts. I have the power here. I can fine every single one of you into submission if I want to. But this time, no one flinched. A man near the front stood up. His voice was steady, but you could see years of frustration in his eyes. You fined me $2,000 because my daughter parked her car on the street during a holiday visit. You threatened to tow it? Do you know how humiliating that was? Another voice rang out, this time from a woman clutching a folder of her own. You tried to ban my husband's wheelchair ramp because you said it ruined the aesthetic appeal. He's a veteran, fought for this country. And you tried to take away his access to his own home? Gasps filled the room. Karen's face drained of color. She tried to wave them off, her voice cracking. Those were the rules. No, Laura cut in sharply. Those were your rules. Twisted and weaponized. She turned to the crowd. What Karen doesn't want you to know is that you do have rights. You can petition. You can vote. You can demand transparency in the finances she's been keeping locked away. You don't have to live under her threats anymore. Karen's eyes darted across the room, but everywhere she looked, she saw defiance. The control she had clung to for years was slipping through her fingers like sand. And then came another blow. The officer stepped forward again, his tone firmer than before. For the record, I filed an official report with the county regarding misuse of emergency services. Karen, calling the police for non-criminal HOA disputes, is an abuse of resources. That's going to be investigated. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't. Oh, I can, he interrupted. I did. The neighbors erupted into murmurs of approval, some clapping again. Karen looked around wildly as though the walls were closing in. She slammed her binder shut and hissed, "This isn't over. None of you know what you're up against." But her threat sounded hollow now. For the first time, she wasn't the predator. She was the prey. That night, back at home, Laura sank into her chair, exhaustion etched across her face. I brought her a cup of tea, setting it gently beside her. "You were incredible tonight," I said softly. She gave a tired smile. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us." But she's not going to back down. People like Karen don't just surrender. She'll find another angle. And Laura was right. 2 days later, we received notice that Karen had scheduled a special session of the board. Her last attempt to tighten her grip. The letter was dripping with her venom, accusing Laura of inciting rebellion and threatening serious consequences for anyone who opposed her. Laura folded the paper neatly, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at me with quiet determination. She wants a showdown, she'll get one. But this time, it won't just be us versus her. The neighborhood will stand together. The day of the special session arrived, and the community center was packed tighter than ever. People lined the walls, some even standing outside by the windows to listen in. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew this was the battle that would decide whether Karen's reign continued or crumbled. Karen walked in late, making her grand entrance as though she still held the crown. Her pearls gleamed, her binder thudded against the table, and her smirk returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. She raised her voice above the chatter. "This meeting is to address the insubordination of residents who believe they can defy the HOA, specifically Judge Williams." Laura rose from her chair, calm as ever, and faced the crowd. "No, Karen, this meeting is about accountability. And tonight, that accountability falls on you." The room fell into a charged silence, every eye locked on Karen and Laura. This was no longer just a dispute over roses. It was a reckoning, and the twist that came next would leave even Karen speechless. Karen gripped her binder so tightly her knuckles turned white. She cleared her throat, her voice dripping with authority she no longer truly held. "Residents, let me remind you the HOA bylaws give this board absolute discretion. Anyone defying board decisions can and will face legal consequences. Judge or not, no one is exempt." But her words didn't have the same sting anymore. Instead of fear, the room responded with skepticism. People were tired of threats, tired of being told they were powerless. Laura didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Absolute discretion. Is that what you call it? Because what I see is abuse of power. Families fined thousands for minor infractions. Veterans humiliated. Children scolded for sidewalk chalk. And where does all that money go, Karen? Straight into the HOA account you've kept hidden for years? A murmur of agreement spread like wildfire. Heads turned, people whispered. A man in the front row stood holding up a folder. "I asked for financial records last year. You ignored me. It's illegal, Karen. Homeowners have the right to see where their money goes." Another woman rose. "I was fined for a Christmas wreath. $200, and when I asked for documentation, you threatened me with court." Karen's face flushed scarlet. "Lies, all of it. I run this neighborhood with standards, and if you people want to live in a trash heap, that's your choice, but not while I'm in charge." Laura opened her folder again, pulling out neatly clipped documents. She laid them across the table for everyone to see. "These are county records. The HOA is required by law to maintain transparency. Yet year after year, financial reports were never submitted. Do you know what that means? Not only are her fines questionable, but her leadership itself may be unlawful." The crowd gasped. Karen's composure shattered. She fumbled with her binder, flipping through pages, as though she could conjure proof out of thin air. But there was nothing. Then came the moment no one expected. From the side of the room, the officer who had spoken out earlier stepped forward again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman in a professional suit, carrying her own stack of documents. She introduced herself with calm authority. "My name is Attorney Rachel Myers. Several homeowners reached out to me after last week's events. I've reviewed the HOA's records, or rather, the lack of them, and I can confirm Judge Williams is right. There are serious irregularities here, enough to warrant legal action." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers filling the hall. Karen's face twisted, her lips trembling. She slammed her binder shut, but her voice cracked as she shouted, "You can't do this. You can't take this away from me. I built this neighborhood. Without me, you'd all drown in chaos." Laura's eyes softened, but her words were sharp. "No, Karen. Without you, we'd finally breathe." It was then that the crowd stood not one by one, but all at once. People rose to their feet, clapping, chanting, their voices shaking the walls. "No more Karen, no more Karen." The sound rolled like thunder, each word hammering the final nail into her rule. Karen's eyes darted wildly. She shouted above the noise, but her voice was lost. Her power had evaporated. For the first time in years, she wasn't feared. She was pitied. The attorney raised her voice to quiet the crowd. "The next step is clear. We can vote for new leadership tonight. By law, the board serves the homeowners, not the other way around. And if the majority demands change, change happens." Karen tried to storm out, but the officer blocked her path, his voice calm but firm. "Not until this vote is done." The ballots were passed out, simple slips of paper asking one question: "Do you wish to remove Karen as HOA president?" The room filled with scratching pens, the energy electric, the air thick with anticipation. Laura sat quietly beside me, her hand resting gently over mine. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even smiling. She was steady, calm, as though she had carried this weight long enough and was finally ready to set it down. When the votes were tallied, the result was undeniable. 97% in favor of removal. Karen had a handful of supporters left, but even they couldn't look her in the eye. The attorney announced the result, her voice clear and firm, effective immediately. "Karen is removed from her position as HOA president." The room erupted again. Ears, hugs, tears of relief. People who had lived under her shadow for years finally felt the sun. Karen's binder slipped from her hands, paper scattering across the floor. She looked around, her eyes wide, her voice breaking. "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But it sounded more like a whimper than a threat. She grabbed her things and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. And just like that, the reign of Karen was over. But for Laura and for all of us, the journey wasn't finished. The neighborhood had been scarred, and healing would take time. Yet for the first time, there was hope. The night after Karen stormed out, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter. For the first time in years, people stood outside their homes chatting, not whispering. Kids rode their bikes down the street without parents nervously scanning for Karen's watchful eyes. Porch lights flickered on. Decorations that had been stashed away came out again, and it felt like life was finally returning. Laura and I sat on the porch, watching it all unfold. She leaned into me, her voice quiet. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted fairness. For everyone. I kissed her hand, my chest tightening. She was in tea just talking about us. She was talking about the single mom who was fined for letting her child play with sidewalk chalk, about the veteran who was threatened with eviction for having a flag in his yard, about the countless families who had lived in fear of a binder-wielding tyrant. The next morning, the HOA attorney, Rachel, called a community meeting. This time there was no tension, no fear, only anticipation. She explained that a temporary board would be set up until a proper election could be held. Volunteers were needed. For the first time, neighbors raised their hands willingly. People wanted to help, to rebuild what had been broken. When Rachel asked if anyone wanted to nominate someone for interim president, a dozen voices shouted at once. Laura. Laura froze. Her eyes widened. Me? No, I'm not. But the crowd cut her off with applause. They weren't asking. They were pleading. They wanted someone who had stood up. Someone who had risked everything for truth. Laura looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. I never wanted power. I just wanted to protect us, I whispered back. And that's exactly why they trust you. She hesitated, but then she nodded. Slowly, she rose from her chair. The applause grew louder, filling the room with hope. She didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. She simply said, "If you believe in me, then I'll do my best to believe in all of you." It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the sincerity, the raw honesty in her voice. For the first time in years, the HOA wasn't a weapon. It was a community again. As the weeks went by, everything changed. The outrageous fines disappeared. Transparency was restored. Neighbors who had been strangers started helping one another. A veteran down the street organized a flag ceremony. The single mom hosted a block party. Kids painted chalk rainbows across the sidewalks, and instead of threats, they got smiles. And Karen, she vanished. Rumors swirled. Some said she moved away. Others whispered about lawsuits waiting for her, but it didn't matter anymore. Her shadow no longer loomed over us. The neighborhood wasn't hers to control. It belonged to the people again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the houses gold, Laura stood in front of the community with tears glistening in her eyes. "I want to thank you," she said softly. "Not for choosing me, but for choosing yourselves, for choosing hope over fear. This neighborhood isn't about one person with a binder. It's about all of us, our families, our children, our future. Together, we're stronger than anyone who tries to divide us." The crowd clapped, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. And I realized something important. This wasn't just a victory over Karen. This was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when it feels like one person holds all the power, courage and truth can turn the tide. Laura had walked into that meeting, a target of ridicule and fines. She walked out a leader not because she wanted to lead, but because she cared enough to stand up. And maybe that's the lesson here for all of us. Sometimes the people who never chase power are the ones who deserve it most. Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that change everything. So the next time you see injustice, the next time someone tries to silence you or make you believe you're powerless, remember this story, remember Laura, remember the night an entire community found its voice. Because when people stand together, no binder, no fine, no bully can ever win. And if this story moved you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it. Let others know that even the smallest act of courage can ripple into something bigger. Subscribe for more stories like this, because somewhere out there, another Karen is waiting, and someone else needs the reminder that they're not alone.